Welcome to Courageous Conversation with Teresa W. Gamble, powered by Concierge Resource Professional Consulting.
Greetings and welcome, everyone. This is your host, Teresa W. Gamble of Courageous Conversations, and we're continuing the conversation in our Learn series about trauma-informed practices and social and emotional learning. In this episode, we're going to get perspectives from former classroom teachers, substitute teachers, counselors, school district leaders, superintendents, and principals. So today we have the fortunate opportunity to interview Mr. Earnest Gamble Sr., a native of Jacksonville, Florida, who was a blue-collar worker, but also, many of you don't know, was a Head Start substitute teacher in the early 90s in Jacksonville, Florida, with the Urban League Head Start program that was on the northwest side of Jacksonville, Florida. Welcome, Mr. Gamble. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing very good. Thank you, Dr. Gamble, for having me here on your show. And I appreciate everything that you have said and done thus far.
Awesome. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a deep dive. So, because we got a lot to cover, and I'm looking forward to hearing your responses, your case studies, your best practices, and even advice for male educators and administrators and incoming teachers and educators who are getting ready to dive into the public education system to teach our generations to come.
Yes.
So my first question for you is, how do you define trauma?
Yes, how I define trauma is it's a pain that starts with a due date when you first experience trouble, but it does not let you know when it's over, ending in an expiration date. Listen, you talk about something that can recognize answers and solutions. Talking about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It can recognize answers and solutions, and yet does not give a right now healing response by the action that they receive from trouble. They become stuck and disoriented by being traumatized.
Wow, that's good. So explain how past experiences might affect a person's definition of trauma. So you gave us a definition of what trauma is, but
Yeah.
how can a person past experiences either redefine or create their own definition of trauma?
Well, the way I see it and the way I have learned and watching this as I was a substitute teacher is that in my experience as well, when people are dealing with past experiences in trauma, a lot of time they don't recognize it. It's not seen by anyone. And sometimes even the one who are experiencing this trauma, a lot of time they don't even recognize it.
That's good.
And so a lot of time you have to, when you recognize it, you have to definitely make some notation of it with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ones that do recognize it, they have to make a notation, but don't discuss it yet until you get a full understanding.
That's real good. You know, to say that that's one of the signs of trauma is when a person acts or demonstrate isolation, where they're withdrawing because either they're trying to figure it out or don't understand it, or they're in what a term I've heard used, shell shock, that they don't know how to respond.
That's right.
So segue into our next question. What trauma-informed training have you attended, if any, during that era? Because you were substitute teaching in 1991. So before you answer that question, tell me a little bit about the Head Start. How did you get into the Head Start?
Yes.
Teaching role?
Yes. Well, I was actually my son, he was attending this school. And so, as our oldest son was attending this school, a lot of time, when parents leave, they want to cry, because they don't want daddy or mama, to leave. And so, oftentimes, I would just hang around till he calms down, and then once he get, settled in class, and then I would just leave and go take care of things that I needed to. And then so eventually, in a very short over time, that I began to ask to volunteer, to
Okay.
come in and volunteer with my son classes and other classes. And so I took on that opportunity, to volunteer, because sometimes we have to volunteer our time in service to understand if this is what in later on in life we may want to do. It may not just be, but just be there to assist with those staff members and other teachers. And so that's how I got started. And then all of a sudden, one day that I came in, and then I was asked by my director at that time, would I like to have a job? I was already working from 3 in the afternoon until 11:30, the middle shift, and as full-time as a dispatch operator for a truck company here locally. And so I accepted it, and they allowed me to pick my time and schedule. And so I made it available, not just to be there for my son, but take an opportunity to help other children learn.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Yeah, you're right. During that time, he hated to separate from you when it was time for you to go. But I saw the opportunity that because he was hysterically upset,
Mhm.
you noticed the trauma he was experiencing from being left alone or
Yeah.
feeling abandoned, which is a sign of trauma that a lot of parents and teachers and staff members they miss. They think this child is just acting out, but it could be a traumatic experience of abandonment or fear of being left alone. So that is amazing. I know they were thankful that you were able to come in and be that male role model. So in this Head Start institution, were there any other male teachers or substitute teachers during that time?
Yes, it was. It was just a very low, a low count of men that was substitute teachers and stuff. A lot of time, they was really encouraging even fathers that as they dropped their sons and grandsons off, to come and volunteer and to be a part, of helping these children. And so the status for men during this time was very low in teaching, especially for an urbanly Head Start program like that to help these children develop. And you also mentioning about what training did I have
Right.
while I was going through this process. Yes, I was trained by the Duval County School Board Administration. I also had in-school program training by my directors and supervisor. And I also was going to obtain educational learning to be not just a substitute teacher, but an educator teacher to get your education certification
That's
during this
good.
process. So yes, I had some good training.
That is great. So in that training, did they even talk about or mention any type of how to handle trauma affected students?
Of course, those were some of the things because they recognized that when these students came, they know they came from broken homes, and when I mean broken home, they can have mom and daddy, and they had other guardians and parenting that that came and neighbors who brought those kids there. But sometimes those kids, when they came to school, a lot of them wasn't getting the proper care. They
Okay.
wasn't getting the food that they need, the nutrition that they needed. And a lot of time, the caregivers that was watching those kids, a lot of time they didn't have the time and the patience to really spend time for them to do their studies and
That's
things
good.
like that. And so you can tell by some in the struggle that you can see the clothes that they was wearing.
Right.
Sometimes you could see them wearing 2 or 3 times out of one week. You knew that was something going on. And that don't mean because they had bad parents.
Right. It could be something else that's going on in the home.
That's
So
right.
how did the training you received and your personal observation as a father and as a parent, being a parent, how did you apply your trauma-informed training in the classroom?
Mhm.
Could you give
Yes.
me a case study or
Yes,
an
of course.
example?
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I, came to your question is that first of all, you got to how to recognize when a child or a teacher are stressed in a uncomfortable mode.
Mm,
And you got to be able to where we was taught how to go to a child or an adult in a soft approach. And if they open up to you to help, right? Then you ask, hey, can I take you to someone to speak, right, to them so that they can feel that there's a support system for them. And a lot of time when people are aggressive, when they see a child is hurting or in distress, and a lot of time you can't treat trauma what trauma expects for it to be aggressive. So when you don't have that soft approach to treat these children and apply a soft approach of love and care and how you handle, because a lot of times they won't open up to you with their problem, even as a child. A baby won't even open up to you. And you can see that and also recognize that, and you can feel that. And so what you have to do is apply a softball, a love and concern that your approach, knowing that they're dealing with something that is overwhelming them, that you don't add to that trauma.
That's good.
Yeah,
That's real good.
yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say that
Mhm.
our approach to students, even other adults,
That's right.
parents, has to be very trauma sensitive because we don't know what their experiences have been before they even engage in a conversation with us,
That's right.
or what happened with the children first thing that morning before they came through the classroom threshold door.
That's right.
So that was very good to know that we have to
Yeah,
take a more sensitive approach,
that's right.
and recognizing the signs,
Mhm.
of those students.
And not
So,
just only the students, Dr. Gamble, we talking about the staff, our
okay,
colleagues,
okay,
because in order for them to be able to make sure that those students learn and have a good environment,
hmm,
they also are dealing with things while they're coming into that building. And you have to be mindful that don't take it because he or she don't like me. They are dealing with something. And you
right.
got to be, like you said, sensitive. And like I said, you have to come with a soft approach. And then they will open up, and sometimes they will. They may not want you to take them to other people to talk to you. They may just have you to talk
Right.
with them and to help solve, the problem or how to deal with what they're dealing with.
That's a good segue that you talked about, that the staff dealing with traumatic experiences.
That's
So
right.
during your time as a substitute teacher at Head Start, it's my understanding you would travel from the different Head Start locations. What was the staff like? Did it vary from location to location? Could you tell they were dealing with trauma experiences or episodes?
Of course. Oh, yes. A lot of time be because, the class sizes, how many kids in these classes. And you have students that was either on medicine or needed to be on medicine. You had a student that was on medicine, didn't need the medicine.
Right.
And so you got to deal with the pressure they was getting from what the school board had us to be trained and monitored by, because they had came up with an idea and passed it where that the pressure came where, for an example, they didn't want us to teach the kids how to spell. They didn't want them to teach them how to read or to say colors and shapes, to learn these colors. And this started this year, 2000. This started way back in the early 90s, that they had wanted to implement this out of the system. And so teachers was being stressed. And sometimes they stress, you can see that they couldn't handle some of this crowd of these children. And so I would be called to go to some of these classes and try to help, monitor, or if a teacher was out. And I would go to these classes and they'd be like, wait a minute, is the class in here today? Because why? They didn't hear all that ruckus. They couldn't, you see the children running out of control and anything like that. So it was encouraging, not just for men, it was encouraging for men to be more present in helping volunteering or substitute teaching. And so I found it very, for me, it was very exciting to be a part of that, to make sure that we help develop these young boys and girls.
So if they was against the teachers teaching the students, how to read, write, know their shapes and colors, who wrote what curriculum guidelines were they following? The districts who didn't want that, and how did the teachers work around it? Because the goal of Head Start is to get them ready for first grade, right?
That is correct. That is correct. And this is one of the problems that you didn't really hear the community or the news them. No one really made a big fuss about it. It did come from, at the time that when I was there, from the school board. Now, who told the school board to do it? That is an unknown question, but we had to follow the curriculum that was put in place. And so this is where it come in very important when we say about our gifts and talent and our skills, because I knew how to draw. Mm-hmm. So when they say, hey, don't teach the kids how to spell their name, right? Or how to write their name. And so what I did, because I knew how to draw, Dr. Gamble, I turned around and made drawings to spell their name.
Oh, wow.
I made drawings where they was able to take on Monday to go home with their parents or who the garden was. And by Wednesday, to give them time to look at it, and then someone would bring it in, and then they had to turn it in by Friday. So what I did was coloring. So what I did was I would say, hey, in your coloring, in your artwork, what color is that? Since I couldn't teach you, hey, this is yellow, this is blue. And so what I did for when we had reading time, and so we couldn't teach them to count. So what I did was I said, okay, I want 3 in this row. Give me 3 people in this row. And then I said, give me 2 people over here. Mm-hmm. So instead of coming out saying, count to 1, 2, 3, I used what we had in the classroom and use those things to teach those kids how to count. Because if I say 3 here and say a girl came and said that, they're gonna say, no, that ain't 3.
Exactly.
They knew. So that's a good example of what I use, the things that was that I use in my skill and the talent to work around those issues and yet taught, because we know that if our kids got in first grade, they wouldn't know anything. And then right. The system would just use them as a number and a dollar bill. And exactly. Then that would have put our young children and children of color, that would have put them in what they call SLD.
Slow learning disorder.
Disability, that's yeah. Right. And so teachers had to come up with ways on how to continue to educate these kids.
While they're dealing with traumatic experiences outside the classroom. That was amazing. So that segues right into our next question. How might a person's race, gender identity, or age impact how you treat a student or staff person directly if they have experienced trauma?
That's a very good question, Dr. Gamble.
Hold on 1 second. All right, Mr. Gamble. So, how might a person's race, that means they color, they
Mhm.
gender, whether they male, female, or identify this new term they got now is binary, whether they not male or female, and
Mhm.
then gender identity, what do they identify as, and their age. How does those factors impact how you treat a student or a staff person differently if they have experienced trauma?
That's a very good question as well. I would say on these uh, few things that I had in mind, it would be oftentimes it's based on their lifestyle, rich or poor.
Okay.
What company or family and friends do they keep? And I would also add to that to say that if the student or staff is not part of a sorority club of any kind, and sometimes that can be a problem for a student or a staff, especially when you're dealing with the age,
Mhm.
the identity, the race, or the identity of who they want to become.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times when people don't know how to adapt to those changes that
Right.
people are dealing with, because see, growing up, they can say, hey, you know, um, I'm a man, or I'm a boy, or I'm a girl,
Mhm.
right? And like I said earlier in our conversation, a lot of time because people don't know how to deal with a soft approach when these people and these children and staff are dealing with this diversity of they feel that who they are or want to become,
Mhm.
and do the race play a part in it? Yes, the race play a major part in it. If you don't mind, I would like to say that when I was coming up in school, and I was living in a upscale neighborhood, a working class men and women of black people, but I had schools around me that was black school that could attend my needs for my grade levels. Well,
Right.
during that time back in the early 60s, I was born in the middle 60s. And so when I had discovered was they was segregating us from our black neighborhood schools to white schools.
Okay.
And so what that process saying is what happened was that sometimes I may be that one or two black person in that class.
Right.
My race played a major part because those teachers back then, we
Mm.
were dealing with a social unrest, which we're dealing with today with race and prejudice. And because somebody didn't like the color of my skin,
Right.
so I didn't get the proper learning from them like I should have. I didn't get the proper teaching from them. I'm sorry. And then, and not that they only didn't teach me, they didn't call my parents to let me know how to help me with my homework,
Right.
call for parenting meetings.
Right.
So they cheated me not only with um, my learning, but they cheated me out of my grades. And then
So
go ahead.
so the teachers back then, they um was selected on how much education you acquired, even though you were already dealing having traumatic experiences, being a very small minority in the classroom of Caucasian students. So how many students would you say you will be in the class with?
Oh, you had up to about at least 30
And
students per class. And so, and for a teacher who was struggling with trauma of who we can't remove our race.
yes,
We
can
can't remove our gender
right,
and our identity gender. We cannot separate that.
right.
But the traumatized is that we had to learn through these behaviors. See, these are behaviors. They are learned behavior trauma.
So how were you able to academically pass in the classroom with a teacher who didn't like you, didn't want to teach you, or try to approach you?
Well, it was my responsibility to go to school to learn.
Right.
I took on those things that they was given. It was my responsibility for me to go home, and the books that we was given and the paper that was given, we had to go home and read. We had to go home and read and get the best understanding that we could,
So
and
you,
listen and take notes. Go ahead, Dr. Gamble.
no, so I was just gonna chime in and say, so you had to self-taught, self-teach yourself back then during the 60s, because that was during the time they had desegregated schools
That's right.
legally, but during that era here in Jacksonville, Florida, education was still segregated.
It was still segregated.
Okay. So you had to go home and self-teach yourself. So when you do that and you go back to school to turn the homework in, what happens?
Yeah, off the time they would when you know you made a good grade, they would literally give you what they call a check, or they would give you a C minus when you done made an A and a B. And then you sometime back in the day, they used to call a E a failure. It wasn't excellent what they're using today.
Right.
An E used to be a failure, an F was a failure, and a D was a failure. They was notorious for those 3 grades and those 3 letters.
Awesome.
And but we still had to maintain and go through this. And while we watched our other parts of color, native of color, they turned around and was getting great. And a lot of them didn't even do no work. They didn't even turn in homework. And then we discovered, growing up in that, doing that the parents was do the kids' homework. How did you recognize that? When they get up in there and raise their hand for questions, they don't raise their hand because they didn't do the work.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yes.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Make total sense.
Mhm.
So race and gender identity and age, it impacts how you treat. So were your teachers, were they older or were they younger?
Well, you actually you had all the age level that what you see in the classroom today, from the oldest to the middle younger to the young. Sometimes they just come fresh out of college. Go ahead. Dr.
That's
Gamble.
good. That's good. That's good to know. I'm just curious because the older veteran teachers, they have a different type of perspective versus the younger ones. So how did you witness any of your teachers taking that sensitive approach that you was talking about earlier? Did any of your teachers take that sensitive approach to you? And if so, how did that approach look to them, but may not look like it was being sensitive to you?
Yes, good question. No, their sensitive approach was to get a paycheck. We was a number, and we was a product for their schools and for their school board system to be able to and justify and say, hey, we hear what the law was passed for us as minority students to be here, but we wasn't that student of their liking.
So in other words, if they saw you all coming to school with old clothes, repeated clothes, or you wasn't eating lunch, those teachers didn't do anything to make sure you had decent clothes, or did you eat?
Well, good question. That's what they expected for us anyway, because that's what they was told that was coming to their school. And because we were at that time going to school, we didn't have, we used to always say the third hand-me-down, second hand-me-down clothes, right?
Right.
And so, no, our clothes didn't look as well as theirs, right?
Okay.
Because they was able to go year round, go buy their kids new clothes.
Right.
And we are wearing our brother's clothes, or the girls are wearing their sister clothes, depending on the year they're going to school. So yes, if we came with a hole in our shirt and everything like that, oh, that was a good conversation for them. That was coffee and donuts for them right there. And you can hear them talking, you can see the expression, and then it gives off in a classroom or how they really, they're supposed to come down the row and check your papers and all that, or they'll bypass and then they'll be on the other side and then they'll just look over, over another child and say, yeah, you need to do that or finish that. They don't come directly to your desk like everybody else and then
Wow.
I'll call you out or do special thing. Like he said, go to the office and, take this, document to the office for us, right? And so they don't do that. They didn't do that. Yeah, so it was pretty dramatically, traumatizing knowing that. And when we got up to go to lunch, Black people always had to be at the end. We couldn't never be first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. We had to be at the end of the line. And then the cafeteria ladies them would serve you the less and the rough part of how that food been, left over from another day, or the burnt part of, they knew what they was doing. And we were being served this, and they're still trying to learn, being traumatized, attacked by these teachers. And they was good.
And some of the staff workers.
And the staff. That's right. It was good.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So that is those are very good examples on, the impact of how you treat a student or staff member differently. Yes. Now, some of those things that I'm aware of when I was in the classroom, I did substitute teacher in public school and taught in private school, which is two different totally environments. To me, private school was more trauma sensitive and a more of a supportive environment versus public education environment. I know with some of the male students, they were always singled out. They were always disciplined. They were always, teachers always, found a reason to put them out the classroom.
That's right.
And my philosophy was, you can't learn if you're outside of the classroom. You have to be in the classroom to get the education. So that was a great question, response, and example. So we're going to move into our next question.
Sure.
Which is, explain ways to model and encourage trauma-informed strategies in your learning environment.
Yes. I have a few here in my mind, and and I have a little note that I'm also looking at to make sure that I really want to bring out this one right here, and to definitely have those models and encourage these students and staff. One is have speakers to come who have overcome trauma experiences. That's one of, do you want to?
That's good. That's good.
Okay, and another one is having class hours courses for teachers and students to become better educated so that they, and so that we, that's right, become better to have outcome for high school and colleges graduating trauma-free. That they can be able to graduate from high school and college trauma-free. And I do believe, going back to when I said earlier, having someone to be able to speak, not going through trauma, to have the experience already, how to come out of trauma so you can have answers and solution.
That's good.
And many people are speaking concerning trauma, but they don't have no answers and solutions. Even if, just like I said, sometimes it takes having classes, hours, going to school as a teacher. Even when you have training and staff, sometimes it's good to have courses in trauma. They should implement this. They don't have it. Even we was getting, basic conversation on how to deal with those kids, so it won't look like that they're being picked on, more like.
Or bullied, right.
Or bullying, not really dealing with what's going on outside of that school for these children.
Right.
They didn't have any substance for a program. You make an order and go ahead and say, we don't want you to learn, but they had no strategy.
That's good.
They had nothing there, so the teachers and the substitute teachers and the administrators to have anything for them.
Right. That well, that's true, but you have a lot of people, they do not like conflict. And I believe that's a big issue with educators, staff, and administrators. If they're a person that likes to avoid conflict, confrontations, it makes it difficult for them to institute trauma-informed educational practices.
That's
And
right.
that is where social emotional learning comes in, where they have to do self-reflection, self-awareness of themselves. How do you feel about this particular issue? How was your learning environment coming up? Were you privileged to get all the education necessary, or was you disadvantaged? And you talked earlier about the ones who were privileged to get the education by the other children parents was doing the homework for them. And the way you knew they didn't do the homework is because when the teacher did the review in the class, they never raised their hand to respond.
That's right. They didn't have no answer.
Exactly. So, but then the children of color who was forced to do it self-taught, teach themselves at home, who put in the work, did the time to do the work, they felt undergirded, cheated, because they wound up getting a C- grade when their counterparts get an A when they didn't even do the work.
They didn't even do the work.
So I agree with you with the trauma-informed strategies, to have speakers to come in and speak to the children,
That's
or
right.
matter of fact, other children
That's right.
who have went through trauma and what coping skills they went through.
That's right.
And things of that nature. Now, I want to back up a bit, because
Sure.
there's something I just thought about that you were talking about earlier when you went through your training. Did they talk about mental health resources for the children in the Head Start program? Or did they train you all on mental health strategies?
No, they did not have, to my knowledge, record knowledge on that. They didn't have anything to correspond with mental illness or mental conditions, or pressure or problems like that. They didn't deal with anything like that. The way they look at it is that their mental thought and process was that all these children that come to these schools like that, they already dealing with the mental part. It was already incorporated, as if that those kids are getting treatment and help just being there, when all of those kids was just literally just a number and dollars.
So they assume that the guidance counselors at the schools is responsible for dealing with the mental health issues, where they coordinate with the parents to take care of that on the outside, but not so much holding the teachers accountable to address those concerns. So to me, it feels like they classified students as educational exceptional students of education, the ESE, or the slow learning disability that you were mentioning earlier, because they thought it was a behavior issue and not looking deeper.
Yes, and see, and what it did was, Dr. Gamble, what it did was it literally set a profile in their files before they hit their first grade.
Exactly. So with that profile and that documentation being in their academic record,
Yes.
how, this is where we going into our next question. What is the importance of the relationship between trauma-informed educational practices, that is placing those children with that profile to put them as a slow learning disorder, and social emotional learning, where the teacher and the students needs to self-reflect on the behaviors that's being conveyed to the public and how it's being viewed by others? So how did that profile, what's the relationship between the two?
Okay, let me start off with the educational practice.
Okay.
Some students are exposed to a teacher practice, oftentimes based on how the staff or teacher like them, by not promoting or giving them the right grade. That's the one dealing with the educational practice. And we're going to go back to that one in a few minutes. But let me give you the other one about the emotional learning.
Okay, before you move on, the
Sure.
trauma-informed educational practices, in other words,
Mhm.
if they know their grading, their power of the pen
Yes.
will be detrimental to the students,
Yes.
how could, what should they have done differently to be more adopt trauma sensitive practices to make sure not to fail them, but how to approach them in a manner for them to be successful?
Well, just go back to the beginning of one of the earlier questions. When
Hmm.
you're talking about race, gender um, identity,
Hmm.
see, as I said just a few minutes earlier as well, when we children of color get to these schools and the teachers, they already know who we are before we get in there.
Exactly.
They know who we are. And so what the students is dealing with here is a person who already mindset is set on their practice way before they came to school, before they became a teacher. It's built, it's already in them, it's in their heart. So the students has to deal with something in a grown person heart who has to teach them.
Hmm.
And they can't get away from it or out of it, or they would just fail the whole school system, period, as a student.
Okay, so now that was the experience during that era. So what should have that looked like?
A student should have, knowing that when they got to that classroom, that a teacher didn't look at them or who they are, who they want to be, identity and all that, gender, race. They should have been looked at as a student, not a diversity because I don't like you. They should have been looked at as a student. And they should have been looked at of a person who that they went to school with. They spent all this time to go to school.
Right.
They accept a job that was going to be teaching people, no matter what color or gender you are, or your
That's
identity.
that's right.
And you can't hide from something that you go to school to teach a group of people, and then all of a sudden you pick and choose. You should have thought about that before you went to school, because that is not your role, your responsibility. Because now it's just for us as colored people and minority other colored people, whatever. They just only a paycheck and a number in the system. For school teachers, that's all they see as. That's all teachers see them as. A
So that's
paycheck.
good. So they should view what should have happened is they should have viewed them as a student.
Yes,
Now, granted, you didn't have that experience in the classroom,
that's
and
right.
but when you were at Head Start, what did that look like? Supporting those children as students. What did that look like?
Yes, because that allowed me to see them as students, not a problem.
Hmm.
As a student of what my responsibility role. First of all, I volunteer first
Right.
to help them and to help them learn.
Hmm.
Then when it became a job to me, then I see them as a student.
So
To
what
do
does that look like? From you being a substitute teacher, how did
yeah.
you help them be the best student they can be to get them ready for first grade?
Because I'm glad you say that. I could be out in the streets, in a mall, a store, a church, and all of a sudden you hear the little kid, Mom, Dad, there go Mr. Gamble, there go Mr. Gamble. That's when when people see you away from the school and
Hmm.
they recognize that you didn't traumatize them, you loved them, you taught them, and they can say, that's my teacher.
That's good.
That's
That's
what
good.
you get that response from. You did your job as a teacher, an educator.
That's good. So now for social emotional learning,
Mhm.
that deals with self-awareness.
Mm,
What is that relationship?
mhm.
How is social emotional learning connected to that trauma informed educational practice you just mentioned about the students seeing you in the public outside of the classroom, acknowledging you as their teacher?
Yes, let me give you something that I had also along speaking of what you're saying there. And the other one that I was going to get ready to do before we had a good conversation about emotional learning was not being sensitive to students with a slow learning, for example, reading, writing, spelling, and math, and so on. Both of these examples are truly an educational practice and an emotional learning treatment. You cannot expect for students of any kind to experience whether you're going to be good sensitive or bad sensitive, because they can recognize, they may not come out and tell you, but they can feel. See, you got to deal with them 5 senses that we was born with. And if one is out, the 4 still operating.
That's true.
And as an educator, a teacher, you got to know that these kids are feeling it all.
Yes.
And sometimes some are to the point where they don't feel but thrill they're sensitive of who they, those 5 senses. But we got to make sure we meet their needs to deal with the trauma, whatever the case is, before they come in that classroom.
Right. So in order to support them, it takes, besides the teacher, it takes you have to adopt a team at the school to address matters that go on outside of the classroom in order for that student to thrive. So that will be part of trauma-informed educational practices, is recruiting those collaborations within the school system to help you as the teacher address those social and emotional conditions. So
Dr. Gamble, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
Dr.
go ahead.
Let me go back. I gave you one of the last things that I was sharing with you, and I want to add just a little piece on that back end, if you don't mind. What I said, both of these examples are truly a educational practice and an emotional learning treatment, directly pushing trauma to its highest damage control without any repercussion to say, I'm sorry, or how can I help make this trauma you're having go away. And a lot of time they don't think about the repercussion, Dr. Gamble, that they help elevate trauma in these people's life. And the sad part about all my school years, now one of them said, I'm sorry. They didn't even offer to help. As we spoke about this, and a lot of time, these are the repercussions why our children of all color, of all gender and race, come to a place they don't want to go to school anymore.
Right.
They commit suicide. They come drop out. And then you wonder why they're on opioid and all of these substance or chemicals.
Right.
Because of the repercussion that these educators, teachers put on these children, not to teach them. All because,
other words, you're right. They're not willing to meet them where they are because they have this expectation they should already know.
That's right.
Or it's not their job to get them where they need to be in order to understand and embrace. So that is why trauma-informed educational practices, they have to not only just look at where they are instructionally, but they need to understand, are they able cognitively in their mind comprehend what you're standing in front of the classroom teaching them.
And Dr. Gamble, let me say this, these are not children teaching children. These are young adults and adults teaching children.
I agree.
These are grown people with grown responsibility. Exactly. And yet we're not dealing because they are grown, we're dealing because they got a behavior problem.
Exactly. Exactly. That's very good. So in the next question, describe the steps you take to create a safe environment of trust and respect. Now, when you was a substitute teacher at Head Start, how did you contribute to making sure that environment was safe and it exude trust and respect?
Okay, good. First, I would have to take a good look at myself and look at my degree or degrees. Then say, am I good fit to teach or learn or educate, to be hopeful? Step 1, these are my steps, Dr. Gamble.
Okay.
Those students or staff you may have offended, go back and say, I'm sorry. In other words, apologize.
That's good.
While you got time, apologize.
Right.
Step 2, I would say, start having teachers and parents and students meeting on how to help along with learning and plans of an action. You got to come up with a plan of action with the parents to help their students. And I would say another step I would use for I would engage with the students or staff on new and passive projects. Sometimes you got to go back to those projects where you failed them or you didn't give them a chance and work with them. And then you got where new projects coming up where you can be not just a good teacher, but a good staff member and go and work with those teachers. And here I would say for another one, step 4, I would say if the students have more than one teacher, engage and encourage them to help with that student. And a lot of times you find out that if a teacher do not like a student and they got more than one teacher that they have to teach that students, you better believe they're gonna go around that cycle and disencourage those teachers to do the same thing.
That's good.
And yeah, that's what I say to that. That's what I say.
So a safe environment is, making, doing the self-management of,
Yes.
Your credentials and your role in your space. So what about if a student is going through a traumatic experience and they don't want to talk about it because they're getting fear of being picked on? What systems would you implement for the student to communicate with you non-verbally that they need help?
That's very good. One of the things that I have learned and what I have done, not just for students in the class, but even for people outside, of the classroom, I would have them to write.
Okay.
Write. Don't have to put your name on it. Just write. Tell what's inside you. Right. And if you don't want to put the name, use a subject, use an item to describe that individual or that problem. That's and good. Write it in a way that, you're telling a story that you know something, but it's really you.
Right.
Yes.
That's very good. That's real good. Almost kind of remind me with women who are in traumatic relationships.
That's right.
How they use to communicate to get help when they're want to get out.
That's right.
So with the trust and respect, that comes in relationship building with the students. So give me an example of a difficult student when you were teaching at Head Start that had a very negative behavior towards you. How did you win the student over to trust and respect you?
Well, Dr. Gamble, I'm gonna tell you that is a hard one to find on my behalf of that, because all the students that I was able to engage, because they're quiet at first, they don't speak, that don't mean that they don't like you or they're not watching you. They're watching how you interact with other students. And so I never really experienced where a child didn't like me like that.
Okay.
They were just shy. So you got some kids that are shy at first, right? But all of a sudden, you take them out for a little play day, you set up, do you get to eat inside or you get to do reading time, and boy, they be like running right to that spot. Because why? There is something they like to hear from you. They like to hear and they like to see how you care about, how they're being treated in class. Exactly. You don't make them a last. In other words, even though you got a class, sometimes 25 kids in, right? But you don't make them feel like they're last.
Got it. In other words, they're included. That's real good, real good. So our next question is, creating a trauma-sensitive learning environment requires the adults to be self-aware and sensitive to individuals who experience trauma. What have you done to support your self-awareness as it relates to trauma sensitive environments?
Yes, good. I have also, as always, I got some good bullet points here, and so we're going to refer back to it. Yes, I would say it must take a place in the hiring of these adults by the businesses, school board, district, and non-business educators. That's one. The next one I would feel to answer that, to give a response, is not being aware of people in position that only qualify to receive a paycheck only, not the love to teach or educate. And I will say on this one is that it takes both the position and the paycheck to serve all students and staff, Dr. Gamble, to become self-awareness. That's what I say to that. You have to be your mind has to see. It starts. Students don't come without a teacher.
Right.
A classroom can't have a place to learn if it ain't hired a teacher. So you got to have administrators. You got to have a supervisor. This falls on the leadership of these education institutes.
Okay, so we know that's a great that we know what's needed in a trauma sensitive learning environment. But let's talk about you. When you were approached to be hired as a substitute teacher in the Head Start, what self-awareness did you have in you that made you feel like you were a viable candidate to be a substitute teacher?
That's good. Well, first of all, when I brought my son to school, they seen a man, a father. Right. First of all, let me say, they seen a husband. They seen a father who shared the responsibility with his wife to make sure that their son come to school and make sure the teachers is aware of that I will be here to attend those meetings, to care about my son. I want to know, his ups and downs.
Right.
See, and before that happened, they have what they call an orientation.
Right.
For the parents to show up, whoever the guardian is of that child. So you can meet the upper administrators of this institute, whatever it may be. And so when they see me, when they looked at me, they looked at a man who came in, not laughing and joking and all of that stuff, because they need to know that they're dealing with parents with common sense.
Right.
They're looking at parents who respect themselves, who respect their children, and who love their children. See, anybody, you can dress up to the finest or to the least. Well, if people don't see in your aura that you are who you are, and you don't tolerate all that craziness, and you all about the business of why your son or your daughter coming to that institute, then that lets them know they're looking at parents and guardians of any kind coming to make sure that their children come here to learn, not to be abusive. They didn't come to be no punching bag.
Exactly.
Yes,
so pretty much you were making sure that those attributes the director saw, the teacher and the director saw that in you.
Yes.
And they wanted that example to be visible on the campus. For what reason?
To teach and help their kids, not a security guard.
Okay.
You you can't be looked at as a security guard when you are offered to come and help assist with these kids.
So that means you had to actually get involved with them and
yes,
and work with them one-on-one, and make sure that they're not just physically present in the room, but
right,
mentally present. So how did you make sure that the students was mentally present in the classroom when you will work with them?
Yes, I literally volunteered, Dr. Gamble, for a year and a half or so. Literally
Okay.
over a year and a half, almost 2 years. I volunteered.
So how did you well, we appreciate the volunteer, and then you
Yes,
get hired,
yes,
and then you're in the classroom and you're
yes.
traveling. When you catch students daydreaming, how do you bring them back, their mind back in the classroom, so they can get their work done?
Yes, a lot of time you just go to them, you ask them, hey, you know their name, you talk to them and say, hey, everything okay? You know, are you understanding the work? Are you understanding what we're engaging into? Everything okay? So that when I talk about that soft approach, you're not yelling, hey, go down, blah, 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 blah. You're not doing that. You
Right.
engage them right back. And so that's what I did in the classroom. I engaged them back. I didn't put them in a timeout corner. I didn't go in and say, I'm gonna call your mama, your daddy, anything like that. You're gonna go to the office and you don't get no, I didn't do that. I brought them back and they was able to sit there and participate and engage in the lesson.
That's good. That
Yes.
is real good. Our last question for this amazing interview. If you could advise future educators about the importance of trauma sensitive practices, what would you tell them?
This is what I would tell them, Dr. Gamble. Let's review a second here. I would say, what made you become an educator? That would be the first question I ask you. Then I would say, if there are any social unrest or any human issue may extract you from being around people, check yourself. Then I would say, be true to yourself and faithful to your hard work being an educator. And lastly, I would say, if you are not part of a bad apple, I'm just gonna drop this nugget on you. If you're not part of a bad apple in a basket, jump out so that students can see, so students can eat and learn how to become a good example on what good apple educators look like. It is sad that we said earlier, about the third question prior to now, we talked about these educators when they have more than one students and they go and contaminate the other teachers to be bad against the student or don't teach the students. You become that bad apple in that practice. And so in order for you not to be part of that in that basket, allow these children to learn so they can be that good apple who you say you really are. But you got to examine yourself first. You got to really understand, why am I going to school? Because my mama or sorority? Because my grandfather? This is what I inherited, generation, go from, right? So you got to really ask yourself, if this is really where I want to be, because you're going to affect these children
Lives for a lifetime.
for a lifetime. And so they're going to deal with this trauma because first of all, you had no recognition to clean it up, because you're in a position, in a place, and you have a chance. Even now, you're going to school for this, you're in classroom now teaching, you have a chance. Don't be that bad apple in that basket along with those who continue to disregard the race, the gender identity, and other cultural things that young boys and girls and teenagers and college students are looking forward just to graduate and be successful as well. So I really encourage and advise you, take my first thing and ask yourself this question: what made me become an educator? Dr. Gamble.
Wow, that's good. That is a huge big mirror to force individuals to self-reflect, because a lot of educators is generational, because my mother was one, my grandmother was one, but that does not always mean you are called to be a teacher. That is very good. I love the analogies that you was able to use for when you couldn't teach the children how to read and write, how you use art therapy, how you use PE, to teach them how to count. And I think that was just amazing for you to do. So
Dr. Gamble,
go ahead.
can I reflect on one of the things you asked me about,
Sure.
how to stay engaged, you know, um, you know, in school,
Right.
not just with the kids and stuff, but this is some couple of things that just ran across my mind, if you don't mind me expressing.
Sure.
For me, that and another thing I also engage with, how to stay engaged with the program in place that the school may have, right?
Right.
Go research more data on trauma. That would really help to engage how to deal with this classroom thing, and also talk with people who have had good outcome, etc. Right? Apply to help those that need how to get through. They got helplines and
Right.
informational centers. So
Right.
these are things that I also apply, that I make sure that I help myself to help these people, because you got to continue to stay informed with the information and the updates that goes on and the changes.
That's real good. That is real good, because trauma is not steady. It's
That's
not
right.
universal. It constantly evolving, and it looks different, and it feels different
That's right.
among people and individuals.
That's right.
So thank you so much, Mr. Gamble, for this
You're
amazing
welcome.
interview about trauma
Yes.
educational practices, how you contributed to the Head Start program in Jacksonville, Florida. I mean, I call them with the little people. They're not old enough to go to public school yet,
That's
but
right. That's right.
they're that early learning development phase that you
Yes.
played a vital role. And I love how you suggested how more men needs to be in the classroom, especially men of color,
Yes.
because I feel that students that see a teacher that looks like them, that will it really will encourage them. Okay, if he's teaching me or she's teaching me, then I can be able to learn and do the learning necessary that needs to be done.
Exactly.
So for our last final thoughts, Mr. Gamble, to our listeners and our viewers, how do they need to start implementing trauma-informed practices in learning environments? And it does not have to, it can be in schools, but we have learning environments in all industries now.
It is very true. I would also say, and especially for those that, no matter what your religion denomination is or whatever, get with your leaders in church that's over the after school programs and things like that, and find out for the sick and shed in ministries and stuff like that, that goes out and does mission work, right? And then you got places in your neighborhood where they volunteer, similar to what FEMA does, right? You got people who have give out food banks. You got all of these programs, and find out what's going on in your neighborhood and around your corner, and check in to see what can you do to assist people that comes for those needs, right? Dealing with the mental, hungry, homeless, and things like that. Medical needs as well, assistance. And so sometimes people can't travel like they used to. So it may be something you can volunteer, and then you never know, it may open up. And trust me, it's nothing wrong making a paycheck for working. I'm just going to tell you right now, if your intellect and your intelligence, your gifts and skills open the doors for you to work and make a paycheck, do so. I encourage that. But also find out why you're trying to make money, and you volunteer to be that leader, that educator, that helper, right? Make sure that you find out, more about what's traumatizing your neighborhood and your household and your ministry and your business, right? Make sure and find out where can you apply your gifts and talent and your skills. And a lot of times you don't have to even let everybody know. It's okay, but just do the best you can. Thank you, Dr. Gamble.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is your host, Teresa W. Gamble, Courageous Conversations. With our Learn series, we're talking to former educators, current educators, future educators, school administrators, counselors, principals, district leaders, and superintendents about trauma educational practices. With this recent pandemic that has disrupted our educational learning system, we need to hear from those those in the grassroots, in the trenches, who have been there, done that, and has best practices to be able to embrace the whole child, socially, emotionally, academically, so they can be successful. So keep listening, stay tuned. We have more to come.
Yes.
You've been listening to Courageous Conversation with Teresa W. Gamble. Courageous Conversation is powered by Concierge Resource Professional Consultant. Would you like to be a guest and have your story, lesson, and best practice to be captured in an audio cyclopedia? We are currently reviewing applications for future guests to join us, and we're especially interested in creating spaces for long-standing or multi-generational Black-owned businesses. For more information and to be considered, please email info@crpcnow.com to request an application. Be not weary in well-doing. You shall reap if you faint not. Galatians 6:9.